Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a getting started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto, as well as our special guest today, Neelam. On the show, we're talking about being on the awakening path, and what does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? Our guest today, Neelam, is a direct disciple of Papaji, and she's been holding satsang internationally since 1996. She runs the not-for-profit Fire of Truth Satsanga. Neelam's unequivocal commitment to truth helps students to turn inward again and again to release underlying patterns of conditioning, which block the recognition of their true nature as presence. The clarity and discriminating wisdom that are intrinsic to this awakened state are freely given by Neelam through spiritual inquiry, as she invites her students into the same recognition of truth that her teacher Papaji transmitted to her. In our conversation with Neelam today, we talk about coming to know yourself as presence, what trust in your true nature means, and how the genuine experience of that trust can change our lives, what true freedom is, and how we can discern the difference between when past is arising and playing out its habitual patterns, using its built-up momentum, and when we are actually present. We discuss in detail what awakening and the capacity of the nervous system have to do with one another, what trauma actually is, and how to get out of the grooves and the charges of the past and to discern when the past is present so that we can truly be really here and not in a remembered past or an imagined future. We're also very grateful that Neelam spoke so eloquently about tenderness and kindness as the true markers of if we are in the present, and how treating ourselves with tenderness can be a real, powerful alchemical agent. If you're enjoying the show, there are a few ways that you can support us. You can leave a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page. You can head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe to receive our weekly Friday digest. Or you can become a supporting member, which is a small monthly amount donated at patreon.com/blissandgrit, and you get rewards for that too. And we also both work privately with clients as they navigate this path. So sessions with us can be another way to support our work and at the same time to get some very solid, tangible support for yourself. Okay, here we go. So, hello, Vanessa, and
hi, Fred.
Big welcome to you, Neelam. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Sure. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're going to have a conversation ultimately that centers around awakening. And I think it would probably be useful as a starting point because we've talked with a number of teachers and everyone has a different way of how they point at what that word means or talk about what it means. So for you, how would you describe what you mean by awakening?
It's a really good question because there's a lot of understanding and misunderstanding about what awakening is. Mm. So, and on the spiritual path, however we view that, what that is, on that spiritual journey, we can have a lot of what we can call awakenings. We have a lot of realizations. We can have a lot of inner shifts. We can have a lot of, things change. Our perceptions change. We realize different things. We recognize different things internally, right? Mm-hmm. So there can be many different, points that we realize different things, right? But when I say awakening, what I really mean is a shift. It's a shift from identifying yourself as this body to knowing yourself as presence. Mm. And in that process that leads to awakening, because I call this a process that leads to awakening, and that might take a moment, an hour, a day, and lifetimes, right? In that process that leads to awakening, there is that movement between knowing yourself as presence. There are moments where you recognize that you are something other than what you think you are, what you believe yourself to be. And then there are moments that you contract back into that sense of individual identity. And it also then looks like presence is not here. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that process, we go back and forth many times, many times, right? Until there is enough trust, let's say. When there is enough trust in our true nature, that moment of enough trust is what I call awakening. Right? And so once awakening happens, there is no more back and forth between, there is just, it's a permanent shift from knowing yourself as this body, because when you say me, you point even to this body, right? You say, that's me, right? And so no matter what our experience is, sometimes more expanded, sometimes less, we really somewhere deeply in the core identify ourselves as this. You see, and in awakening that changes, right? You're not anymore. So then, when you look within, then there's presence, right? It's not anymore an object that you identify with.
Mm.
So does that answer?
That's beautifully. Yeah, that's beautifully put. Brooke and I both have had many of those revelations, contractions.
Contract back. We're very well versed in that process.
Yeah, revelation, contract back. So we understand all too well. And it's funny, the power of those revelations, and it feels like it's going to be this lasting experience. And next thing I know, my ego mind is like, no, but I really have to worry about this, and it's going back into its past momentums.
But it needs to be there because it shows you what's possible, right?
Mm.
Otherwise we wouldn't know, like I say, spiritual experience is like candy, some of us get a lot of spiritual experiences on the way to awakening. Some of us don't. It doesn't matter, right? But if you get different spiritual experiences, it's a little bit like candy, because you get like, wow, this is so great,
Mm-hmm.
And way it needs to be like that, right? Because then, there's something to look forward to, right? Now, it's just as long as we understand that it's not about that spiritual experience, that it's really about knowing your true nature.
Mm. We heard a quote the other day. We were at the Science and Non-Duality Conference in California, and a woman named, I forgot her name, but she was a reverend, and she got up on stage and she said something like, pain pushes until passion pulls. And I realized that for my own spiritual path, so much of it began simply because I was in pain. I was suffering. And I thought, well, what else could I do? Do I kill myself, or do I find something different? And the pain was pushing. And then I understand what you're saying, because the more we have these realizations, the more something else begins to pull. It's like something maybe I couldn't even put into words, where you start to be drawn forward. And I thought it could be interesting, when we did your class on the nervous system and awakening, you actually outlined 4 elements to awakening. And I thought if we went through them, it might be interesting. You said a strong desire for truth and freedom, birth in a human body, capacity of the nervous system, and trust in our true nature.
And discrimination is the 5th one, right?
Great.
So, as you said before, there's these moments of knowing, and then there's the momentum of the past, right? Mm-hmm. Which pulls us back into identifying, believing the story, whatever it is, right? So that is why we need that strong desire for truth and freedom, right? Because the strong desire for freedom really is what pushes us in a different direction, right? There's when we come into this body, what brings us into this body, there already has to be some desire for truth. Otherwise, we would not end up interested. You know what I mean? We would not end up sitting here talking about this, right?
Yeah.
But there's also obviously a momentum of unfinished patterns of the past, right? Unfinished desires. That's what brings us into a birth, right? So the desire for truth is important because it pushes us towards, looking for our true nature. Right? Otherwise, we will be just, it's like Papaji, my teacher, used to say, everybody's going down the stream and we are going up the stream. Right?
Wow.
Which is the desire for truth is just completely different than everything else that is going on in the world. Right? And it's also very unique because desires usually just are there for something, for some level of fulfillment in the future, right? Like in a moment, what is here is not okay, is not enough. Then desire arises and says, well, if I did this, or if I maybe went there, or maybe if I was with this person, or maybe if I was, maybe doing this kind of job, or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So the desire, there's always a promise of fulfillment in the future, right? And desire for truth is different, you see, because desire for truth is the only desire that desires its own true source, right? It desires its own true nature. It doesn't desire anything out there, you see. It doesn't desire anything external, even though at first it looks like truth, awakening, and freedom are somewhere. It doesn't.
Yeah,
it looks like object, right? It looks like, well, it's out there, and somebody has it. And
if I read the right books, I'll have it too.
Exactly, right. Even though it's not really an object, but it looks that way, right? So desire for truth, and Papaji used to say a strong desire for truth, a burning desire for freedom is necessary, right? Because then, we have the willingness, right? And when I speak about desire for truth, I say, the practical application of it is the willingness in the moment to be present, right? Because you see, it's easy to just talk about, like, I want truth, I want awakening, I want freedom. When past arises, so often our thoughts go, I wish I was awakened, right? Or I wish I was free, But I say practical application of desire for truth is in that moment, can I be present, right? Can I actually come here in this moment, right? Rather than seeing another, scenario for the future, right? There's going to be some time that I'm going to be awakened and I was, right? Why not here in this moment, right? Because our true nature is already here. So we could, right? Even right now in this moment, right? We can just come here, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really crucial. And I say, desire for truth, and that's the freedom is the purpose of our life, right? So that's why the desire for truth is so important, right?
And how would you, speaking of giving all of us a little bit of candy, how would you describe what you mean by freedom? Where is it we're headed for with this desire for truth and freedom? Or even how would you describe how you're using the word truth too?
When I speak about this, I make a distinction between awakening and freedom.
Okay.
I make a distinction even between a direct experience of presence, awakening, and freedom. And what I mean by that, because right now as we are sitting here, and I like to be practical, we can, all of us right now, and everybody that is watching this, right? We can right now just direct your attention inward, right? Good, beautiful, right? And that moment is what I call direct experience of presence. Right? Sometimes, because I can never say never, this can become awakening also, right? But for most of us, it's not like that. For most of us, it's like direct experience of presence, identity, direct experience of presence, identity, right? And so we go back and forth, right? And then at some point, enough trust and we have awakening, right? I spoke about it already. It's a shift, So from now on, when you look within, you're not looking at an object anymore, you see. You're not perceiving an object. You are knowing yourself as presence, right? You are knowing yourself as presence, truth. Truth, presence, freedom, we could almost say one and the same, right? Okay. One and the same, because when I say truth, it means who are we really? Not what we think, right? Who are we truly? That's truth. Truth is presence is our true nature. Truth is everything arises in presence. Truth is, the body comes and goes, the sense of I comes and goes. Present is permanent, right? That's truth, right? Mm. So then we have, I hope it's not too fast. I'm not going to.
No, this is very helpful. Yeah.
So then we have, direct experience of presence, which anybody can do at any moment. I invite everybody always, right? Let's just do it right now, right? Then we have awakening at some point. And then, so often we believe that awakening means the end of the past. Mm. Well, it's not like that, right? Because when we are on the journey and we see that goal of awakening, it feels like, wow, once I get there, it's, this is it, right? And it is it, you know what I mean? But it doesn't mean what we think, you see? Because awakening doesn't necessarily mean the end of the arising of the past, right? So there can be an awakening and there can be still past arising. And there still can be a tendency to want to follow the momentum of the past, you see. And so that's why I make a distinction, because sometimes, Papaji just spoke about right here, and that's it. You know what I mean? That's awakening, that's enlightenment, that's truth, that's freedom, that's everything. And then he also say, throw out all the words, just be here. You know what I mean? That's all, right? But just to make it practical and also more for the Western mind, freedom is what I call an independence from the past, you see. Mm. So it's not just awakening itself, because I've experienced myself, and then I have seen in others awakening that begins to become an object also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have seen that.
Yeah. It's an awakened state, and there's this lack of congruence, right? It's not congruent, you know what I mean? Like you see it and it's great, but then something is missing, right? Mm. And what's missing is that awakening is beautiful, it's great, it's powerful, it's amazing, and it's not the end, right? Not the end. We can keep waking up deeper and deeper and deeper, and we can really, embody awakening, which means recognition of presence becomes functional in life. Mm. You sit in meditation, everything is okay just the way it is. You relate to your partner and you suddenly nothing is okay the way it is, right? So where is the embodiment of that awakening, right? How does that happen that we know that truth while we relate, while we are at work, while we are doing other things, right? And then freedom is really independence from the past. So the willingness to just say, wait a minute, this is the past. Hmm. Can I really, first of all, recognize it for what it is, right? And then can I really be here?
Right.
And can I just come and see what really is the movement that arises here that is not dependent on the past? You see? That's what I call freedom, right? Movement that is not dependent on the momentum of the past, because past arises, being in the body, past arises and reactivity arises and this and that. And, if awakening is an object, then we have a disconnect between, well, I'm awakened, so who cares, right? Well, guess what? That's not freedom, right? Freedom is when we really know in the moment, like, wait a minute, this is the past. And can I be here, right? And can I wait? And can I see what really arises here? You see, what is the movement in a moment rather than, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than the momentum of the past that, that's not freedom, right?
Well, the idea of freedom sounds amazing. Brooke and I, in our last episode, were talking about conditioning and, what if more than you could ever imagine was simply conditioned, or we could call it the momentum of the past. And as you were talking about realizing you're not an object, nor is awakening an object, you could understand why we can struggle so much because, most of us have been treated as objects since we were born, right? And we're in a world that sees through object consciousness. And so it really is such a upstream swim to go against the momentum of the collective to be viewing everything through this body-oriented object consciousness.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very different momentum, right?
Yeah.
That's why we have to keep reminding ourselves on it because, even though there's more and more people interested in truth and freedom, compared to the collective, it's still just a drop in the ocean, you know what I mean? So that's why we have to keep reminding ourselves like, oh, wait a minute, we are going this way.
Yeah, right.
Because it's so,
right?
It's so tempting to move with the past. Like, I was just going through it today and I don't even know what problem I was, turning over in my head. But at some point I had the realization, like, what are you doing here? And I could see that this was, a groove, right? A groove that was just playing itself through. And I could today actually say, well, come here and be present. Of course, I knew I was about to interview you. I had the energy to support me, right? That was energy to support me. But what's interesting is even though the momentum of the past can oftentimes be painful or create so much suffering from us, there is almost like a sticky nature, or even sometimes it feels tasty, like to be righteous or to be inflamed. And I think that's a really interesting human quality. What would make the momentum of the past so compelling?
Well, what makes momentum of the past compelling is repetition. That's one thing. The reason why suddenly it seems like out of nowhere, when the circumstances are right, you may be doing fine, right? And then suddenly it looks like out of nowhere, something arises. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Some type of response, some type of, movement, reactivity, right? So, that has happened many times before. And we have acted on that momentum so many times that by repetition, it has created a momentum, right? So when it arises, it's not just this one time that it arises, you see, but it's because it has been repeated so many times, it has a lot of energy behind it, right? And what's hidden in the past, in the tendency of the past, what is hidden is that belief that there is some other time, some other place, some other situation, some other person that is going to give you what you want, you see, rather than knowing that this is it. You know what I mean? The truth is here, right? But because that is hidden, we can call it the I or the ego. I rarely speak about it in that sense because sometimes it becomes another object that we have to now get rid of, which is another misunderstanding. Right. But that sense of me that just feels like, me needs this and it's not here. You know what I mean? And because that's hidden from view, that's why it feels so compelling, you see, because you are still compelled by the misunderstanding that there really is some other time. You still believe in the future. You still believe that there really is going to be some real other time when you actually are going to get
everything.
just this one thing, just this,
But then it'll make everything better, or finally it'll work out for me, or.
And that's
amazing.
Keeps it moving. And then every time we engage, without this becoming some kind of judgment or some kind of worry, but every time we engage, we recharge that momentum, you see. We make it stronger again. And then you know what happens, it subsides. And you go like, oh, it's gone, right? Ha. Good luck with that, because now when the circumstance is right, it's going to arise again, and then you're going to go like, wow, where did that come from? You see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
And you're talking about this process very eloquently, and Vanessa and I have certainly spent plenty of time in this open, contract, and you were saying that once enough trust in your true nature develops, that's when it becomes genuine awakening. And so we've heard this before. One of our favorite things to say is trust your life. Living it has been a much deeper practice than certainly I anticipated, and it continues to unfold and unfold. So I'm curious about this trust, because again, I can make that the object, right? Like, well, why can't I just get that trust piece and, plug it in and everything just unfolds? I'm curious how you experience how that happens. Is it just like an organic ripening? It's just time? Or do you find that there are pointers that help people with genuine trust?
Well, there's a combination of things. I would just use my example very briefly. When I went to see Papaji, and I already had a very clear, before I went to see Papaji, I had a very clear understanding that this is my teacher and that's where I need to go. Mm-hmm. So when I arrived there, if you would have asked me, do you trust what he is saying? I would have said, of course. But it wasn't like that, you see. Because while I was sitting in satsang, and I was sitting, with my arms crossed, not really, but like that, sitting in a little bit of that arrogance, I have had so many experiences, spiritual experiences, I'm here, and what are you going to show me? Right? What are you going to give me, right? So, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but there were some other events that really made me aware of like how silly that is, like here I am with my teacher and I'm just sitting there, waiting. Like I realized I really have to give myself to it, you see. Mm-hmm. When I speak about the desire for truth, there is the more innocent momentum that arises within that says, well, let's go this way, or let's go that way, or let's do this, or let's do that. So I realized I have to just trust that, you see. I have to trust that momentum, right? And the reason, and it took some time, you see, it took some time until in those satsangs with Papaji, I came to a moment of full trust in which I realized I can completely trust what he's saying, you see. And that moment was followed by awakening, right? But the reason why it's not easy, because we are not trusting a person, presence appears to us as a person, as a teacher. When there's a strong desire for truth, presence appears as a teacher and speaks to us in the words we can understand, right? So we are not really trusting the person, but we are trusting our true nature, you see. It's just we don't have the translation within. We don't know how to do it within on our own. So that's why we need that outer manifestation that shows up and says, hey, go this way, right? Or this is how it's done, or this is what, you know what I mean? Because we are not fully reading that or hearing that voice within. We need to have it spoken to us, on the outside until we get it, until we trust it, until we realize, oh yeah, that's really true. So we are not trusting the person per se, even though that's an element there too, but we are really trusting presence, right? As it manifests itself through that person, right? We are trusting presence. And the reason we don't trust is because of our past, you see. So many times, like even let's just take this life, and there's so much more than this life, but let's just take this life, growing up. And how many times we have learned that we can't trust what we know, you see. How many times our environment has reflected that back to us?
Yeah.
How many times we have been told, a lot of the times it happens unconsciously, but we have been actually told, no, it's not like that, you see, right? So we have learned, this is a learned behavior, and I don't mean just this life, but in general, we have learned to not to trust what we know is true, you see. And that, as a matter of fact, is what causes suffering, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why it's so challenging in moments in life. That's why it's so challenging, right? Because when the past arises, it looks very real, and it looks like, yep, that's the way it is, you see. Mm-hmm. And that's why we don't trust, right? We don't trust when you say trust your life, I wouldn't even say that. I would say trust what you know is true. See? Trust presence. Just fully, like in the moment when things are challenging, when things are difficult, when a lot is going on, when past arises, is there a willingness to come and just come back into presence? See? Because that's trust. Right? But also that's why we need another person sometimes, like a teacher, because we sometimes need to work through those places where we simply can't go ourselves because there's not enough trust. We have to have that somebody that is there with us and saying, okay, honey, it's okay. Let's just do it. Let's just be here. It's okay. Let's just try it. Let's see how it goes until we get that sense within that it's actually okay, that we can actually be here. So,
yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, if you think about trust, yes, sometimes we have learned not to trust other people because of harm that's created in our lives, but that deeper level of learning not to trust ourselves, right? Not to even trust the instincts or intuitions. And that's certainly been my life story. I may say, I'm not hungry. And my parents would say, yes, you are. Eat now. The simplest things where I am hungry and my dad would say, it's not dinner time. Okay. Right. We're so many of us are taught to trust the outer manifestations. You're good if you're successful. If so, a lot of empathy for all of us, because you can see what a journey it is just to simply reclaim trusting presence.
Sure. Of course. Of course. Does that answer your question? Do you think about trust, or is there more? More?
I'm curious how it actually intersects with one of the other qualities I think that was needed for awakening or for freedom, which is the capacity of the nervous system. And we took your class, Awakening in the Nervous System, and so you can see how if you have a nervous system, I mean, we all have in this culture some pretty dysregulated nervous systems for the most part. And some people have a very hard time being here because of a hypervigilant nervous system or trauma or things like that. So I'm just curious for you, how does that play with the capacity to trust?
So let me just back up a little bit and say, one of the prerequisites for freedom is birth in a human body. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Because that's, I don't know if people have heard that, but, this is one of the main prerequisites. We have to have a birth in a human body. Of course, there are some exceptions to that, right? But why do we need the human body? You see, we need the intellect, because the intellect, humans are the only species on the planet, for the most part, like we can talk about primates, maybe have a little bit of that can self-reflect, right? We need the intellect for inquiry and self-reflection. We are the only species that can look within and say, who am I? Right? What is this? What's going on? Right? And that's very, very key, for inquiry, right? And then we also need the nervous system, because we need the nervous system to experience the arising past. So now when I speak about, capacity of the nervous system to be here or awakening, right? When past arises, it shows up in your physiology, right? And what it means you experience it physically. You experience sensation, you experience feeling, you experience emotion, you experience thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it shows up, it's a very physiological experience, right? It's not just your thinking, there's a heart rate, there is contraction in your breathing, maybe your hands are getting cold, or, there's some other symptoms, right? There's a lot of physical sensations, physiology gets engaged. And when it arises like that, it looks very real, right?
Yeah.
Because, it's not just a passing thought. There's a lot of, experience going on in your body, right? So it looks very, very real. And it's very believable, right? So if there is no capacity in the nervous system to be here, and the past arises, because, so ideally, and of course, nobody's in that ideal place all the time, but ideally, past arises, it moves through, it gets experienced, right? It's met, because we can either avoid it, we can try to suppress it, or we can just meet it, right? It gets met, and then it moves on. And it actually, see that momentum we were speaking about before, it starts to diminish every time we meet it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's ideal, right? But most of the time, what happens is the nervous system doesn't have the capacity to be here, so it goes into fight, flight, or freeze, or overwhelm, or collapse. And we have all these other symptoms, which then really take our attention, because we can't just be here, see? Like the nervous system has not learned to be here, conditioned by the past. It's conditioned by the past, right? So we have to help it. We have to teach it. We have to remind it what does it mean to be here, right? So then when past arises, we were speaking about that momentum, right? When past arises, there is capacity to be here. So it's not just overwhelming. It's not just, fight, flight, or freeze, but it's actually like, oh yeah, there's something going on. I can just be here, right? Because the nervous system has learned or has been reminded, because it actually knows how to do it, but it has forgotten through conditioning, right? Through trauma, through conditioning, through life events. It has forgotten, how to be here. So then we can just, be here, and the past is here also, and it doesn't have to take your attention, right? You can just experience it, Does that make sense? Or
So, but if we can get a little finer in detail. So if you're here and your attention isn't going to the past, it's just staying here, does that mean your attention tracks the sensation of the experience? Can we talk a little more detailed?
Well, when we say, let's clarify, what does it mean to be here?
Great.
Here means aware of what's present here in this moment. Right?
Okay. So
however you get there, because that's like, let's not move with anything. Let's come into the moment. Right? What I find helps a lot is if for example, if past is present, and already attention is gone, sensations have arisen, and already we are in the scenario, like, I'm going to do this and that. And then we catch that, I find what's really helpful is to notice the sensation of your body. How can I come more into the moment, right? Let's be very practical. Let's maybe hold an object in your hand, right? Give the brain a little information, like, okay, we are here, Let's notice, like, the weight of your body where you're sitting, for example. Good. Giving another piece of information to the brain, right? If we look around a little bit through the eyes, it goes information directly through a nerve into your brain, oh, we are here. Okay. when you do that, and if you were doing it right now, you might notice, if anybody was doing it, you might notice that things started to slow down, right? Mm-hmm. You notice that things have become a little more calm and slow down, and, like there's a little more space, being here, right? So that's what being here means. It means coming to the moment, coming to what's really actually present in this moment, rather than into the scenario of whatever we are thinking or experiencing or wanting or not wanting in this moment, right? And that coming into the moment is like a practice, for the nervous system, for the brain. So now when tendencies of the past arise, anger, for example, frustration, disappointment, rather than it just taking you for the ride, you have that capacity to be here. So you can just say, okay, let's just have anger, right? Let's just notice it as a sensation in the body, Let's not get into the story of it or what it means or where it goes or where it came from, but let's meet it here in this moment. Maybe your breathing will get a little difficult, or maybe whatever, maybe you will be sweating a little bit or have some shaking in your body, but then eventually it's going to pass. Right? Mm-hmm. And then you can just be here, you see.
And then your nervous system probably gains some resilience, right? It starts to actually gain the capacity you're talking about.
Exactly, because it's not just overwhelmed, it's not just overwhelmed by what arises, but it also remains functional, right? Mm-hmm. So in life, when something is going on that is very upsetting, rather than just being either lost in the reactivity of it or lost in the overwhelm, like, oh my God, this is just like way too much and I can't deal with it. There's actually a capacity to be here, and then remember freedom, right? And we can actually be here and we can just see like what stuff is happening, and then we can still be here, you see. Mm. And there still can be movement or action right now, that is coming more from now than from the past, right? We can still move in a certain way from here, rather than just either reactivity or fight, flight, or freeze or overwhelm, right? Like just gone, like can't really do anything, just total overwhelm, right? Yeah. And we can just be here, you see. So, and then whatever the expression is in the moment, we don't know what's going to be, right? But whatever it is, there's capacity for it, rather than just being lost in the past, right?
Yeah. When we took the class with you, one of the things you point to a lot is to have your eyes open when you're meeting your experience in the presence. And it's not the first time I've heard a meditation teacher recommend, have your eyes open. But I never took to it. I always liked to have my eyes closed. But what I realize now is oftentimes when I was meeting experience with my eyes closed, you go a lot into imagination as well. And that's very different. And when you first started to describe that, you were actually giving the brain information that it's safe here right now. It clicked the power of what you're expressing.
And also, because I'm not saying we always have to sit with our eyes open. Eventually, we can notice things with your eyes closed or with your eyes open. But if you're just sitting with your eyes closed, and if you're liking to sit with your eyes closed, chances are that the experience is just running through the old groove. It's just re-experiencing itself in a certain way. And even though it feels like we are doing something, because maybe there's an emotional release, or maybe there's some mental understanding, or maybe there's this or that, you know what I mean? I don't want to diminish that, but actually we are not coming more into the present, you see. Wow. We are just reinforcing the same route, we are just, it goes in the same groove and it just repeats itself, right? So it's okay, but it doesn't really, because sometimes the sitting with your eyes open and really being present, it feels like work at first, it's challenging because it opens a different place in your nervous system in which you actually need to be here.
Yeah.
See, you are here. You are not, you know what I mean? And that allows both the past to be experienced and also what you're saying, that sense of safety that comes from just being here, right? Which is natural. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't, it's not something we manufacture, it's natural.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is something that's coming up a lot in the last couple of weeks in my client work. And I'm realizing I've been talking with people a lot about, sometimes we can over-identify, like Vanessa was describing, and like you were just describing, Neelam, with the sensation, and we are going on the ride, and it feels like we must be doing inner work, but we're really just on the ride of the nervous system groove. And I've discovered that for some people, and it's often people who've experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of being overwhelmed and no opportunity to discharge that overwhelm, that if I direct them into the body and into the sensation, it's just amplifying the groove and they're just getting lost on the ride. And if you do things so instead of going in, you're with the sensation. So you're here in the body, but you're going to the space, like you were saying with the eyes, looking, visually saying, look, it's safe here. Or even just things like feeling temperature on the surface of your skin or holding the object, the example you gave. And I think that, I work in body therapy fields and I also do embodiment work. We can overemphasize the importance of being vigilant inside, but it actually is just like this. It just keeps the loop heightened, that the space, the out there, is really important to stay connected to.
Well, trauma is a whole other, topic, so to speak, because it creates a very unique set of circumstances in the nervous system. So the approach has to be very, like the understanding of the nervous system. There has to be a great understanding of the nervous system, and there has to be a great understanding of how to approach, because trauma means charge. It's not really an event.
Right.
Trauma is not an event. It's not what happened. It's not, even though sometimes it's helpful to understand that, right? In some way, sometimes making the connections, it's also important, but it's really a charge that is present in your nervous system still right now, right? And to really understand how to help the nervous system to come to terms with this charge, right? And that's why what you're saying, sometimes directing somebody right into the sensation, is just too much, because that nervous system is already overwhelmed, you see. So there has to be an understanding of how to work with it in a way that grows capacity, right? That really allows the nervous system to start to learn again how to regulate, until it can, do it a little bit on its own, and then maybe more direction towards sensation is more, possible, right? Because otherwise it's just, when there's a lot of charge present, almost anything can be overwhelming, right?
Right.
So have to be really sensitive to that. So
yeah. And, for those listening who know they have trauma or know they have a large charge in their system, I know that this isn't the same as really being with you in satsang or days long retreats, but are some of the pointers you would give for discharge similar to what you said, eyes open, holding an object, or would you give a different set of pointers?
At the same time, what's good to remember is that it is possible to be here no matter what. It's possible, and what often happens when there is a lot of trauma in the nervous system, when people have a lot of charge from the past, which most of us do, it's just the way it is, right? Then when we approach meditation or sitting quietly, if you sit with your eyes closed, it might just be too overwhelming, number one. Even sometimes sitting is too overwhelming. Because from the perspective of the nervous system, being quiet is dangerous. From the perspective of the traumatized nervous system, being quiet means you don't know what's going to happen, So sitting may be just too much for some people also. So that's why I say start very, very slow. If you can take a minute or two or three keep your eyes open, do what I do in the beginning of the calls, like look around, notice, hold an object, notice the weight of your back, notice your feet and your legs, just start, don't even go into any of the particular sensations, but just do like a simple, notice different parts of your body, and if you can, even just doing 2 or 3 minutes of that can really start reminding the nervous system and the brain on like, oh yeah, we are here. This is we can just be here, So I would say be careful, but not too cautious, because if you just do like I have this meditation recorded on my website that people can go to and follow anytime, and that's just that. You sit here with your eyes open, just notice, just look around, and that much anybody can do, I would say.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes, as you said, like notice the warmth or the temperature of your skin or things like that, more external.
Yeah.
So,
great.
It's kind of to give the direction for a specific charge, just theoretically, so.
I love that you bring the conversation of the nervous system and the body into the conversation of awakening as well. Because when we talk about conditioning, what Brooke and I have always noticed is it really is in the body. It's not just a thought stream. And it's amazing how rapid it happens. Like, for example, I got sick. I had mold poisoning in my history. And what I noticed is when the mold elevates, my body almost takes the shape of what it took when I was sick. Like my nervous system changes, my skeleton changes, right? Like it almost remembers by association and it repeats itself. So I think it's really, for me, you need a lot of compassion and tenderness and it helps when you begin to understand this, what you called predetermined capacity. That this is something that's happening. You can't have conscious will over it. What you can have conscious will over is your willingness to meet it when it arises.
Sure. And also to know that it's predetermined, that means there's no point in getting upset.
Yeah.
It's just kind of how it is, right? It means it's doing the best it can, but also to understand that it changes too. You see, and presence changes that, right? The moment we are willing to be here, it changes the capacity, right? So, to know that both is true, because sometimes people spend so much time upset about where they are at. And, that's really not doing anything, right? It is not helping anything. It's not growing anything. It's just, frustration. But to realize, oh, that's where it's at. Can I be here? That's always, that's always help, that's always going to be something that will grow capacity over time. So,
yeah, that tenderness towards the self for wherever I am at, I have found profoundly important, because I think we're all conditioned in so much shame and self-blame and why am I not over there? That's the whole function or movement of the separate self. Like, why am I not over there, the awakened one? So if we can have tenderness for this, just seems to be what I'm capable of right now. It softens it.
Right. And tenderness is transcendence, you see. Like we think about, again, if we think of awakening as an object, then we are going to overlook where we are at. And then, your practice is going to have all the elements of your conditioning. If in your conditioning you are harsh and impatient and, don't like something, then your desire for awakening is going to be like that too, harsh and uncomfortable, and all that, right? So kindness and tenderness is really transcendent, because it cuts through the sense of I, you see.
Yeah.
In truth, there's tenderness. You see, tenderness and truth are one and the same. Right? Kindness, tenderness is the same. So if tenderness is not present in a moment, then past is present.
That is such a good marker. That is so interesting. I've really found that to be true, for sure.
And if we don't get that, then we really still see then the awakening has a bottom. You see, it has an end. You know what I mean? If we don't see that tenderness is the same as truth, you see, then awakening is still just, it has an end. Like, okay, only if this is like that, you know what I mean? But it can't be like this. Well, who says that, right? Who cares about that?
Right.
I think I heard you say before that a lot of things could impact the nervous system. Obviously, your past reactivities can arise. Past life stuff can come up through the nervous system. I'm sure your families, like your lineage and what might be, as well as even picking up, like empathing other people's feelings. Am I remembering correctly?
I'm not sure about empathing others, even though I'm sure some of it, but the collective, the ancestral, the tendencies that we bring already, conditioning from this life or anything that we bring already, any traumatic events, environment, a lot of things can affect the nervous system. And, it's very sensitive, and the best way to deal with it is to just know how to deal with it. Right. There's a lot of elements that can affect it, the way it functions or doesn't, right?
So would it be fair to say that when you're looking at being present with it here now, it's not necessary one has the storyline, right? Like it's not necessary one understands what the reactivity is.
As a matter of fact, we don't need to understand. When I say that, I always say, sometimes it's helpful to know what's going on. I'm not excluding that because we don't want, like this harshness, like, okay, let's not go into the store, let's just be here, which is in truth how it is. But sometimes understanding can be helpful, but ultimately the resolve of it is not in understanding. Yeah. We can't resolve it in understanding. The only resolve is in being present, right? That's the only place where there's change, because you see, mentally, it looks like there's change, right? Because we think, well, I'm going to do it this way, and then I'm going to do it that way, strategies, right? And I'm going to do it like this, and from now on, and that's just and it looks like there's a change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
There isn't, like we know that.
Really.
we know that one. Yeah.
And the next time it's just the same or worse, right? But the change is when we come into the present and we are saying, okay, can I meet this in this moment? You see, can I just really, again, come into the moment? Like what's here right now? Let me just see where we are. Let's just come into the moment. Let's just let the little brain and the nervous system relax a little bit. Let's be here. And then let's really notice what is present. And can I be present to that? You see? Because that's where change is, right? That's where we realize also everything is okay just the way it is, you see. But it's not a thought, but it's a real knowing, like just the way it is right now, you see. It's very different action from there, right? From here, than the action from our reactivity, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, maybe that's a good place to talk about number 5, which I think you said might have been discernment.
Discernment. Yeah.
Discrimination. Yeah.
Discrimination.
Yeah. There's still something in what you were saying before that I wanted to say something about. I don't remember right now, but discrimination, it's very important to recognize the difference between past and present. Because if you can recognize the past for what it is, that's like half of the work done already. You see. Mm-hmm. If you can just say, I know this. I've seen this before. Mm-hmm. This is the past. You see. Just by saying that, you're coming back into the present. Right? Just by saying that. And also, what Papaji used to say, whatever you can see is not who you are. Right? So if you can see something, if you can see it, like, oh, wait a minute, I know this, I've seen this. That's not who you are. Right? So, when people struggle, because one of the effects of trauma past and past in general is that we have this real misunderstanding in believing that things are not okay the way they are. You see? That you are not okay the way they are, the way you are, that the world is not okay the way it is, that other people are not okay the way they are, that your experience is not okay the way it is, right? That's a real, vortex of energy, and that's the very definition of the past. So it's easy to go into it, because if we believe it even in the slightest, that wrongness comes up, like, you are wrong, you see, and that's the past. Right? Mm. So that's why I say to people, if when past is present, name it for yourself. Find a way to name it. I don't care how you do it, but I say, I'm triggered. Past is here. I'm triggered. Or I say, past is here. Mm. Because just even noticing that, if we want to undo this vortex can be very appealing. The wrongness has been around for so long. You see, the wrongness. You see, that's like the kind of, if we had to distill it, that's the definition of the past. It's wrong. See? So the vortex is very appealing. Did you notice that in your life? Do you notice that
yes.
When past arises, it's so easy to just go into the judgment, like, I'm wrong, or this is wrong, or I shouldn't be, or it shouldn't be. Why am I experiencing this? Or why, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If we can just name it, which then, it just takes out the energy of it. If you can just name it, if you can just say, past is here. If you can just say, I'm triggered, you see. Then immediately, even though there's still symptoms in your body and mind, immediately you are going back into presence.
Yeah.
Immediately. Because you're already you're not caught in the illusion. That's why discrimination is so important. You're not caught in that illusion anymore, even though you might still be experiencing symptoms, right? You might still have to sit with it, and you might still need to let the little body-mind calm down and the nervous system unwind or whatever else is going on, but you are not anymore believing that it's true. You see? It's very, very important,
Right.
Papaji used to speak about discrimination. He used to use this example of the swan, that is called Hamza. And that swan, when there's water mixed with milk, the swan will only drink milk and it will leave water behind, right? Right? That's discrimination. You see, it's so fine, right?
Yeah.
That in the midst of everything, you can still just distill it like, wait a minute, I know this, this is the past. So, okay, it's not wrong. It's just what it is.
Yeah.
Let's just be here, right? Very powerful.
And you don't need it. I mean, in a culture where we're, I was trained in psychology, right? I still do coach and work with people, but in a culture where we have psychology that looks at the past, and where, when we write autobiographical tales and we look at our past, so it's really easy for us to be identified with our past. I was the one who thinks I'm wrong all of the time. I was the one who wasn't loved. I was, so even as these thoughts and feelings come up, it feels like me, it feels like the air you breathe, right? It's so interesting.
Right. And then it reinforces that sense of I, because it's me who is upset, and it's me who has a hard time, and it's me who is, you know what I mean? And the other end of the spectrum is, being harsh. And I don't recommend that either. The one spectrum is like to be too much identified with the story, right? And the other spectrum is like, no, don't go into the story. Just stay here,
Yeah.
That I don't recommend either. I recommend kindness, which is, there's some truth to what's going on. Obviously, it's the relative reality of what's happening right now. But instead of entertaining it, let's just be present to it. Let's have kindness to it, Let's not just dismiss it, though, either. Because some people dismiss it, or they do what I call the spiritual bypass, like let's just go to presence. And where's presence if it's not here?
Yeah.
Like, where's presence?
Raise the vibes. To where?
Yeah. Where is it? You know what I mean? Like, presence is here, right? So let's be here. So let's have that kindness, and there has to be such an innocence in that, such an innocence like a little child that just says, okay, that's just the way it is, you see?
Yeah.
It's the way it's happening right now. Let's just be here, right? So,
yeah. I've certainly tried the hard line route on myself, and everything started to move when I could discover tenderness for, like you were saying, just the simple awareness when I can catch, past is here, I'm triggered, and it's in innocence. It's not because there's something wrong with me or I screwed up or I'm not doing it right. It's totally in innocence. And then we can really unfold in a completely different way.
Now I remember what I wanted to say before, which is at some point after awakening, maybe like a couple of years after awakening, I found that place of harshness within where certain things that were arising were not okay. And that created suffering. And then, I looked for some ways and discovered, tenderness, right? That you just need to be present. And, and in the beginning, because the deeper parts of conditioning, there was still some kind of wanting to hold on, like to an awakened state, why go there? Like, why, so that the deeper parts of conditioning, that took a little while to really be present to. And then at some point, I remember I traveled somewhere, I think to Hawaii, and this really big piece of conditioning was arising, and I had this reaction to it, and I just said, "What is this? What is this whole business with tenderness? Like nonsense, And that night, I had a dream with Papaji because I said Papaji didn't use that word tenderness. You see that how the mind, how the consciousness can use even the spiritual words, right, and understanding. Yeah. And that night I had the dream with Papaji, and Papaji came in the dream and he said, with tenderness to the very end.
I love that.
Beautiful. And we've had the pleasure of being in your class, and for all of you listening in Neelam's teleclass that we did with her, sometimes people will share, right? They'll share the experience that's happening, and Neelam counsels them to be present. And it is so kind, and it is so tender, genuine love, because you also don't let them go off course into the past,
sure.
But you hold them in the present with a lot of kindness. So it's always wonderful to hear it wasn't always that way.
Right. And also because, the investment, for me, the investment is, it's always more important that we can be present than anything else. So that's the most important thing, because the investment of it, that's an investment that pays off over a long time, you see.
Yeah.
If anybody can experience that real kindness, not some kind of, idea of kindness again, not some kind of fake, everything goes, right? Because you notice boundaries are very clear too, right? There's no going off. But when we are here with what is here, let's just really learn, because when we are touched by this real tenderness, so often we don't even remember that. Sometimes it takes a few times before we can even get that, internally, but that pays off so much long term, you see. So for me, that's more important, that moment of tenderness, than anything else, you see, the moment of real presence to what is, right? Like that we know, like, oh yeah, that's how I can really be here, you see. That's how it is. So,
and it's so cool when you pointed it out as a transcendent quality, which many of us can relate to through love. Because sometimes I think when we're relating to my body as me, when we think we are our bodies have a limited capacity. It is an actual limit. Whereas when you're in transcendence, all of a sudden there's, for me at least, a different experience of what I can meet.
Of course. And because presence is really not limited, right? It's not limited by the body or the nervous system, right? But when there's true tenderness, it transcends. You see, like people often think, well, transcendence is bypassing what is and going into presence. And I say transcendence is when you can really actually be here, because that just, transcends, whatever is here. Then you see like, oh, there's just nothing.
Yeah.
when we are present, it's just like nothing. You know what I mean? So that's just really.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Neelam. I'm so grateful for your teachings. I'm so glad you're bridging the nervous system with awakening.
Sure.
And thank you for talking with us and all of our listeners today.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything we didn't get to that you would love to share?
No, it was all good. We spoke about everything, and I think we have a call coming up maybe on the 25th of November.
Great.
That is about growing the capacity of the nervous system for awakening, embodiment, and freedom. So, or there may be some other things on the website to look at some point, schedule-wise.
So for those listening, we'll put that in the show notes. So there'll be a direct link to it.
I think we covered everything. Lovely to meet you and very nice to have a conversation. I'm really enjoying it. So
it was really wonderful to meet you. Thank you, Neelam.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. Big gratitude again to Neelam for talking with us today, and you can find more of her work at neelam.org. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned and some of the coursework that we mentioned that Neelam has upcoming in the future, and some of what we attended in the past, some online coursework about awakening in the nervous system, we will also put in the show notes, and those are at blissandgrit.com. You can connect with us and support the show in a few ways. So first, there's Instagram and Facebook, where you can just come and chat with us. Or you can become a supporting member at patreon.com/blissandgrit. That's a place where you can donate a small monthly amount and get resources for yourself, including we have a private forum and some other goodies too. And Vanessa and I both work privately with clients all over the world as they walk their own paths and release the chronic suffering from the past and arrive more here. Information about how to do that and how to find our private practices are also linked on the Bliss and Grit website, or you can just go to vanessascotto.com or brookthomas.me. We're very grateful for the reviews you've written, the membership support you've provided, and all the notes that you send. Thank you.